This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by
Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 best-selling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
He's got to say a password. I thought, what's the password? And he said pineapple. Tell him to say pineapple as loud as he can. And so we're screaming at Nezam, dude, say pineapple. And so he's really laid back, and he walks over to this guy at the gate and he says, excuse me, sir, I'm the pineapple.
I mean, my goodness. I mean, what you've done over the course of not just your career, but your lifetime. I mean, incredible. And I want to get into all this. Latest one right here. Nobody is coming to save you. It's that's always good to have in mind, especially if you're hoping someone will save you. And Operation Pineapple Express here. Before we get into these, though, I want to get into your background a bit. But right here on this book right here, it was very interesting the way you went about doing this and the way you went about telling this story. There's no background on you. There's no, so I joined the military and then I did this and then I did that. And then here's this thing that I did here in 2021. This is all 2021 and all about our Afghan partners and all about others and the text messages at the end, the way over the pacing. It's just an incredible read, eye-opening read, even for those of us who are on the periphery of some of these things. So I highly recommend everybody pick this up. But before we get to this, I want to get to some of the things that are not in this book, and that's your background. Give me the story. What led you into the military?
I met a Green Beret when I was 14.
Oh, wow.
Jack.
Where?
Yeah, in Mount Ida, Arkansas.
No kidding.
Little logging town. My dad was a forester, and we lived in this town, and we didn't even have a stoplight. And a Green Beret named Mark was home on leave, and I met this guy in Harold's Soda Shop.
What?
And he took the time. Like, I went up to him, asked him who he was, what he did, and he took the time to sit down with me and talk to me about special forces and what Green Berets were. And I was just enthralled with this guy. I thought he was just the coolest dude ever. And
how do you know he was special forces, or how did you know that he was military? What was the connection other than seeing a guy in this shop?
Yeah, so his dad owned the soda shop, and so his reputation preceded him. I'd always heard about this Green Beret from my buddy Bill, and it was known, but he was never there. And so, like, when he finally walked in, it was just like, I knew who the dude was, and a lot of other people did too. I mean, we're talking about a town that like 36 people in my graduating class.
Wow.
So this was a really small community, and there were no secrets in that community. And when he showed up, just the way he carried himself and the way he just kind of sauntered in, I just thought, man, this is a really neat guy. And I was a runt of a kid and pretty bullied and just always on the outside looking in. And I just thought, man, there's something about this guy that I want to be around. And I think he sensed that too. He took the time to sit down with me and just talk with me. And he talked to me, Jack. What was cool, man, was he talked to me like, almost like he was talking to somebody who was ready to make the decision right then. It's like he saw in me a level of interest that was genuine. And he just, he talked to me like an adult. He talked to me about what it was about, and I wasn't used to that really. That was a really cool thing for me. And he explained to me what Green Berets do and how they work by, with, and through, and working with indigenous cultures. And by the time we had finished the conversation, that was it. I was hooked at 14, and I never looked back.
No, what year was this? Were you aware of what Army Special Forces soldier was? What Green Berets were? Had Hollywood influenced you? Did you know going into that conversation what a Green Beret was?
I had some knowledge because I was really interested in the military. I wanted to get out of that little town, and I had done kind of my own research on Green Berets. With I don't know if you remember the 1965 National Geographic article that came out about Green Berets in Vietnam, was where they were working to put the Montagnard uprising down. I found that in my dad's attic, and had read that thing probably 50 times. And there was just kind of a romanticized vision of what it was, but I'd never met one. I'd never sat with one and really heard like what it was that they do, and how they build connections and rapport, and help people stand up on their own. And that for me just was such a cool concept, and that everything was around this ability to build rapport with people, and go in with 12 and come out with 1,200. And so I knew some about what they were, but it was after the conversation with Mark that I felt like I really could see myself and locate myself in his story.
Okay. What year was that?
Would have been, I graduated in 86. So that would have been like 83.
83. Okay. So a few years later, is it Hans Halberstadt? Is that how you say his name? There was a book called The Green Berets. I don't know if you remember those. There was a few. One was called SWAT. Later, there was a SEAL one, but there was a few that he did back then in the mid 80s. I don't think it was out then. I think it came out a few years later, but I remember the Green Beret one. It was called The Green Beret, I think. And I have it somewhere still. It's up in my library. But I remember reading that, just being enthralled with how he describes the training and then the warrior diplomat aspect of it. And it was just different from the way I'd seen Green Berets described in other popular culture, I guess, movies, books. And I remember being really taken with that. So I understand the draw. And I think it was around the same time. Because same thing back then, you couldn't just go on and find one of a gazillion special operators on Instagram. Being able to talk to somebody like that was rare. And because I didn't have anyone to talk to about the military in general, much less special operations. But there was a camp counselor, Mountain Mel, back in the day, and he was a Vietnam era Army Special Forces soldier, and I didn't get to talk to him. I was very young. I was probably 9 when I met him, but he had a survival course that he taught at this camp that I went to, and just being around him was something very special.
Yeah, and did you know that you were going to go into the SEAL teams early on?
Oh yeah, very early, age 7. I found out what they were. Yep. So early on in life, but it was all, popular culture. A lot of it's in the blood, I think, just this desire to test oneself. And interesting, you mentioned the National Geographic article, because about 2 weeks ago, I just ordered it on eBay. It arrived on Friday. So I have that because my next book goes back to 1968 and fictional, but weaves in a lot of that Mac VSOG history from Vietnam. So I have that. I haven't read it yet, but it's right. The National Geographic article that you mentioned is actually in my office.
I think I have it. It's right behind me somewhere. But what I loved about that article, Jack, was that it was about the relationship with the Montagnards. And I think the subtitle was something to the effect of how coolness under fire prevented a strategic disaster. But like 1965, they're in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, and at this point, when that Montagnard uprising happened, that was really sponsored externally by Cambodia, that could have ended everything. Like that could have been the end game for the effort in Southeast Asia. And you have these little A camps dotting these mountains with Montagnards in them, and just about every camp revolted and overthrew their advisors. And this one little camp with a detachment commander and a handful of Green Berets recognized what was going on when the star clusters went up. And what the captain did, in my assessment, was one of the most amazing things I've ever read. Was he took the advice of the Montagnard tribal leader. He had Vietnamese special forces in his camp, and he had Montagnards. And, of course, those two were a microcosm of the fissure that was happening all around the highlands. Like that was the problem. And because the Vietnamese special forces represented the state and the Montagnards represented an oppressed tribe, right? And so what the captain did, Gillespie, he took the advice of a Montagnard tribal leader in his camp, and they went and did a friendship ceremony. As the camps are falling all around him, they go, and can you imagine like what he said to his team sergeant? He's like, hey, I'm going to go with the shaman and the Montagnard and the Vietnamese SF captain. We're going to drink some rice wine, put on a loincloth, and we're going to have a friendship ceremony, get the bunker ready to blow. I mean, but that's exactly what he did. He went and they literally had this friendship ceremony so that the Montagnard could not turn on the Vietnamese Special Forces officer. He had to tell his superiors, I can't do that. We've had this ceremony. And that saved that camp from being overrun, and it was so unconventional, so indigenous, so unorthodox that captain would make that choice in that moment to hold the camp together that way by literally investing in rapport when everything else was falling apart. And that that always stuck with me, that kind of approach. And once I met Mark, it was solidified.
Wow. That story made such an impact on you comes through in the very little that you talk about your career in here, your time in uniform, village stability operations. I can see why that story has such an impact, and plays a role later on in your life. All right. I want to talk a little bit about some of the pistols from my second novel, True Believer. And why are SIG pistols so important to me? That is because I took the 226 right here in its Mark 25 version, downrange on every single deployment in the SEAL teams. And it plays a very major role in both the Terminal List book and television show. And I always had this pistol on my side, so very natural for me to incorporate SIG pistols into the pages of my novels. And I love that SIG pushes boundaries and takes risks. So I started writing True Believer in the summer of 2016. And during that time, this pistol right here, the P365, this one came out. So in the first book, if you remember, James Reese, he carries the Glock 43. And when I get to True Believer, now the 365 is out, and I have a conversation in True Believer. James Reese has spent time learning to live again in Mozambique. He's been recruited by the CIA by his friend Freddie Strain for a mission and is now in Mozambique getting up to speed on some new weaponry. I'll read that right now. Okay, here you've got some handguns. Even though I know you like the Glocks, I'd like you to try the new SIG 365, especially for work in low-vis environments. It holds more rounds than your 43. I heard a lot about this during deployment. I'll give it a run, Reese said, immediately impressed by the subcompact pistol. While Reese loved his subcompact G43, the unprecedented 12+1 9mm capacity of the SIG P365, along with its surprisingly smooth striker-fire trigger and night sights, made this one a winner right out of the box. And this is the SIG P320 with upgraded triggers by Bruce Gray, Freddie said, picking up SIG's new 9mm pistol. I think you'll like her. I already like her, Reese said with a smile. SIG had recently won the highly sought-after, nearly decade-long process to replace the Beret 92F and supply the U.S. Armed Forces with a new advanced pistol variant of the SIG P320, now adopted as the M17, M18. So right there is the M17 and 18 right here. So talking about the 365, nice subcompact pistol right there. This is the one that I carry pretty much every day and absolutely love the P365. There are a lot of variants right now, but back when I wrote this book, there was just one, and that's it right there. For a little more firepower, James Reese opts for the P320. Freddie Strain introduces him to that pistol. And of course, now there are many variations of the P320 pistol. And you can even build your own, like this one, or like this one, from the SIG Custom Works shop. And of course, they're being carried by our military downrange and in training as the M17 and M18. Those are the pistols of True Believer. After that conversation with Mark, what's your path into the Army?
So I went to University of Central Arkansas, ROTC scholarship, Army ROTC, and was just intent. All I could think about was being an SF team leader. I was commissioned quartermaster, and didn't want that, but that's what I got in 1991, and went to Panama, Republic of Panama, for a few years, and served as a quartermaster officer, not a very good one, and really just kind of marked time, Jack, until I was able to try out for selection in 1995. And went to Fort Bragg, tried out, and really never looked back. That was one other thing I'll just say that I think was super impactful on me is that the last couple of years that I was in Panama had some really good conventional Army mentors who knew that's what I wanted to do. They didn't penalize me for it. They didn't, and they actually put me in a special ops support unit in Panama, where I was able to travel with A teams all over Central and South America and do like their logistical work, their Class A stuff. And that was amazing because I got to see them in action doing foreign internal defense and how A teams really operated. And I got to meet all these amazing NCOs in 7th Group. And so by the time I went to selection, not only did I know I wanted to be an SF guy, I knew what group I wanted to go to. I had some Spanish under my belt. And I was just raring to go.
Nice. I went into Haiti with 7th Group, Charlie 3rd of the 7th, the SIF company back then.
Yeah, the SIF, absolutely.
I got to go in with them as just a liaison, SEAL liaison back then. But it was amazing watching Big Army come together for that. It was the Aristide when he was deposed and all of that. So seeing Big Army come together on essentially an abandoned airfield, it wasn't abandoned, but nothing really on it. And to see the Army come in with TF-160 and then all the support elements and essentially build from nothing to this base where you can do these massive rock drills ready getting ready to go in to do the mission was just incredible to see that. To work with those guys was really cool. I had always had an amazing relationship with all the SF guys I got to work with downrange, whether that was in Iraq or the Philippines or the Haiti contingency. But what happens after that? You do this for a couple of year stint in what people would call the regular Army, conventional Army, and then into Q course. You go to selection.
I did. I went to selection, went to the Q course, liked it so much I did it a couple of times. I struggled with a lot of the schools in the Army, and I don't know if I was so small. I was really small. And so I struggled. I struggled with Ranger School. I did that one a couple of times before I finally graduated. Air Assault School.
Wow. Was that before Q course?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You did Ranger School before Q course? Okay.
Yep, I did. And I got recycled twice. I got recycled in Air Assault School, and then I got recycled in the Q course twice. And honestly, you know what? That taught me more about myself than I think anything else in the course. When there was facing that level of failure and seeing your teammates moving on or your classmates and recognizing that you have to start over and what that's going to feel like. And it really was just a real test for me. And especially in the Q course, because I was so close to my classmates. I'd gone through the infantry advanced course with them at Benning and selection with many of them. And I felt like I was, going to make it all the way through, but I had some challenges with long range land navigation. It really, I struggled. But on the third time made it through and got my beret and was assigned to 7th Special Forces Group. I already spoke Spanish pretty well. And so I was assigned to 1st Battalion, 7th Group in Fort Bragg. And almost right away, Jack was sent down to the border between Peru and Ecuador. They had got into a little skirmish and was on a border outpost with Peruvian and Ecuadorian officers trying to be an advisor for them or an observer. And that was it. That set in motion about a decade in 7th Group. Most of it in Central and South America, and towards the end of that decade, I did the post 9/11 deployments to Afghanistan.
What was the hardest part about Ranger School for you?
Great question. I would say probably the hardest part about Ranger School for me was towards the end was the sleep. I really struggled with the sleep. It got to where I was really having a hard time. And by the time we got to desert phase, I was complete. I was just wasted, and I just could not hold it together. And I mean, I passed desert fine, but it I felt like I was not going to. I felt like every moment was pure agony for me, and it was all sleep deprivation.
Did you go through around the same time that they lost those guys in Florida?
Shortly before, that was shortly before, and that was horrible when they lost them down in the swamp phase, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, yeah, that was a few years afterwards. Um, it was terrible.
Got it. So you did that. You do Ranger School. You've done Air Assault School already. You make it through the Q course. Did you go? Did you have extra Spanish language training?
No, well, I did in the sense that I did several Spanish immersion courses, in that I had done actually when I was in the special ops support unit.
Hmm.
I had really good NCOs, and they were SF guys, and they said, "Look, if you want to go seventh group, why would you wait for DLI? Start now, go." And they got me in these Spanish immersion courses that were really painful, but I picked up Spanish pretty darn quick because I was living literally immersed in a Spanish speaking environment in Puerto Rico for like 45 days at a time. And so you pick it up really quick. And so by the time I got to my unit, I was, I was pretty good with Spanish. I didn't do, military free fall or scuba or anything like that. I had a team ready to go, open. And so I just jumped right in there and deployed to the border mission I told you about. And then we spent a lot of time in Colombia and Paraguay. Those were my two primary countries as a detachment commander, and for those couple of years that I was on the team.
And where were you on 9/11?
So on 9/11, I was in my second command as a captain in a headquarters support company in 1st Battalion, 7th Group. And I remember we were still at Bragg, and we had just finished up kind of a multi-echelon live fire up at Fort Pickett. And we were driving with my first sergeant, an iconic Green Beret named Donnie. We were driving north towards Fort Pickett to hand out certificates and basically recognize the Fort Pickett staff for an amazing, we try to do that rapport building thing, when you're doing foreign internal defense and JSETs, you try to recognize the people. And we were going up to do that, kind of a non-sexy way to spend the first part of a week. And we were going to stay overnight. And I remember listening, we were on talk radio, and we heard that a plane had gone into the tower, the two towers. And then we were listening intently. And then when we heard the second plane had hit, Donnie turned the car around in the interstate and, floored it back to Bragg. And of course, by the time we got there, the whole world had turned upside down. But yeah, that's where I was. And then, everything shifted, didn't it? Everything shifted towards Afghanistan and a few years later, Iraq.
Yeah. And when do you get to Afghanistan?
I got to Afghanistan because the way it worked out was, obviously 5th Group went in first, the horse soldiers, quickly followed by 3rd Group. And then you had Iraq kicked off not long after that, which 5th Group moved into 10th and 3rd. All throughout that, 7th Group remained focused on Central and South America, which was obviously, it was driving me crazy, and it drove a lot of us crazy. We wanted to get and fight, and we were more of a strategic reserve, kind of like 1st Group. I think it was 04 when I first deployed to Afghanistan. And I deployed, by that time, my team time was over. And I deployed as a Battalion 3, as an S3 operations officer. And then the next year I went back as a group and Sig Sauer operations officer. The preponderance of my time, and I think I talk about this in Pineapple, was as an operations and control kind of guy. My time behind a rucksack was done. I got some time out doing tactical things, but for the most part, compared to like what my brothers and what you guys did, it was not as much. It was more about planning and coordinating and frankly, getting guys on and off target. That became my life.
Yeah. Did you have multiple teams doing things like village stability operations and other ones doing more direct action type things, or were they doing both, training the host nation forces? I want to talk to you about those different units as well. But as the operations officer, what were you guys doing at the time?
That's a great question. When I went in, for example, in 04, 05 as a battalion operations officer, I was in the south part of Afghanistan, and we had the south and the west. So we were managing, multiple SOF elements who were also coalition. I don't think we had any SEAL platoons with us at that time. They were mostly in the east.
Introducing the BCM Mark 15 timepiece. Rugged, purpose-built, American design, Swiss made. Engineered for precision and unwavering reliability. A flat sapphire crystal with dual-layer anti-reflective coating ensures clarity under any conditions. Its unidirectional 60-minute bezel delivers dependable performance when timing counts. Equipped with a satin stainless steel bracelet featuring a secure deployment clasp. Super Luminova X1 illuminates the hand's numerals and hour markers, offering visibility you can trust. With 200 meters of water resistance, the Mark 15 is built to endure. Each model is limited to just 200 pieces worldwide. Available now at BravoCompanyUSA.com.
But we did have a lot of teams doing direct action, door kicking, surgical strike kind of stuff. And then we had a lot of teams that were also doing, more foreign internal defense, combat advisory kind of stuff with partners. But to be honest with you, Jack, the Afghan National Army had not reached a point where they were postured to even go out and fight until, 05. And then they were phasing the militias out at that point, which I'm not sure was a good idea. So the partner work was not as developed. So there was a lot of unilateral stuff going on in 04, 05. When I went back in 06, 07 as a JSOTF, that's like a Joint Task Force Operations Officer out of Bagram, we had SEALs and Coalition SOF and Marine Special Ops and SF guys, and all of them were doing a range of different things from surgical strike to special reconnaissance to partnering with the Afghan commandos now who had been stood up, and these other more elite units that we were advising. VSO, Village Stability Operations, did not start until my third deployment it started in 2009, and it really got heavy in 2010. And I was pretty involved in that as well. And even then, though, you saw a lot of teams with their beards, the Indigenous Guard, kind of doing the modern day Magnificent Seven, but you also still had a lot of surgical strike going on. So there was always a mixture of that. And to me, it was always kind of knowing how to make that right cocktail for what you needed to do.
Yeah. Can you describe the different partner forces that you had experience with over our time in Afghanistan? Because it'll come to play a role here in our withdrawal in August of 2021. But the difference between maybe the different Afghan Special Operations Forces, the National Strike Unit, there are a host of different ones out there that can be semi-confusing to people.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I'll start by saying that, most of my appreciation for partner forces, I actually developed by these amazing NCOs who mentored me in Central and South America from 7th Crew, because, that was such a permissive environment. You could not roll out unilaterally. The only way you could get anything done was by, with, and through your partner force in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. And these were very advanced special operations forces already. And we had decades of experience working at their shoulders. So it was just ingrained in me as a young captain that everything you do is with your partner force, right? And so when I got to Afghanistan, I was, I had not been there before. So it was interesting to me to see, first of all, we were working with the remnants of these militias that had been with the horse soldiers in the early days. They were basically the private armies of warlords, Pashtun warlords, Uzbek warlords, and, ferocious, vicious fighters, not exactly disciplined and not exactly positioned to take Afghanistan into the next level of, evolution towards capacity of, dealing with civilians and the stuff that they were going to have to do for long-term security ops. So there was this notion that we needed to build capacity of an Afghan national army. So that was the next partner force that I was exposed to. And these were straight infantry, zero experience kind of guys. Remember, there was no standing army when we went into Afghanistan. So we had to start from scratch. And so we had to push these guys out, and they were, again, straight leg infantry for the most part. Many of them were illiterate. Many of them were uneducated, good fighters ultimately over time. But that was the partner force in 05 for me, was the Afghan National Army. And there were very few of them. They were still cranking them out. We had the National Guard that was actually generating. And now I want to pause here and say something that in some circles in my community is a little unpopular, but I believe that Special Forces, we kind of excused ourselves from the role of partner force development early in the war because we wanted to get on targets. We wanted to get after the enemy. And I think that was a mistake. I think that we basically removed ourselves from the epicenter of something that we're very good at. And we ceded that to Title 10 to the National Guard. And nothing against the Guard, love them, but that was a hell of a ask to put this on the National Guard to stand up this entire army, and I think Special Forces should have been in the mix for that. Now, fast forward a couple of years, you've got entire corps of the Afghan National Army. So by 2007, 2008, you start to see special ops in the Siege SOTFs, the Command Joint Task Force, going, hey, let's stand up some elite units that can do what we do. So I think the commandos were first. They're like a strike ranger type unit, mostly partnered with Afghan Special Forces. But you also had another group called the Tejas. They worked a lot with the SEALs as partners. They worked a lot with the Rangers as partners. And then you even had Tier 1 units that were, there were zero units with the agency. They called them zero units. There were top tier units that went with Delta and the upper echelon of the SEAL team. And then the final one that I was exposed to was Afghan Special Forces. And this was interesting, Jack, in that we stood this up under General Scott Miller when VSO was really getting underway and moving into the villages like crazy. This modern day Magnificent Seven approach. We thought, you know what? We need Afghan advisors to do by, with, and through, to do internal defense, who are mature, who understand how to be combat multipliers, who can work with police, tribal elders, commandos, conventional forces, and bring it all together. And so we created Afghan Special Forces, the 15-man detachments, and they were our partners along with the commandos. The commandos would do the hammer. The Afghan Special Forces would work alongside the teams that were embedded for VSO. Those were the primary partner forces that I worked with. There was also the National Mine Reduction Group. I don't know if you ever heard of those cats, but they were funded by another pot of money, and their job was to basically look for IEDs for SEALs and SF guys that were going on missions. And they were our guardian angels for insider threats, probably the most vetted, loyal dudes that we served with. And but they were not part of the special operations formation. They were a different pot of money, but they were with us on everything that we did from a Force Pro perspective. So I'll pause there. That was what the partner array looked like from my foxhole.
Got it. And when do you meet? Am I saying this name right? Nezam.
Nezam, yeah.
When do you meet him?
I met him in 2010. He was in the first Afghan Special Forces class to graduate. And the thing about Nezam that was so cool was this guy, like many young Afghans his age, was a product of the Soviet occupation. His father was killed as a mujahideen by the Soviets in an ambush. His house was bombed when he was 4 months old, and his mom was a widow, and somehow he escaped without a scratch. And then his mom was sold into an arranged marriage to a dude that was 75. And Nezam slept in the barn until he was 11. He ran away from home, and he joined the Afghan National Army at about 17. after he saw the towers hit on television, and after he met a few Afghan National Army guys. He went to the recruiter, he joined, and was kind of just born because of the struggle he had endured, like a lot of the early commandos. And he had seen so much struggle, and he was looking for family, and he found it in the commandos. And then he excelled there. He was selected for Afghan SF. And that's when I met him. I was actually the keynote speaker at their graduation over at Moorhead, because we were sending the teams were salivating for an Afghan SF counterpart, because they were, at this point, Jack, the VSO program was growing fast. It was the summer of 2010. A lot of people were asking for it. And so teams were splitting, not into 6-man teams, but like 3-man teams in these very contentious villages. And they really needed some help.
When it says staccato, it comes with a promise. In any condition, at any moment, this gun is ready, because your life and the lives you protect depend on it. The future of the 2011 begins with the HD line. Narrower grip with no grip safety. You can run your pistol in either hand with fully mirrored controls and ergonomics. Uses widely available, reliable magazines in a variety of capacities, so you can stock up on more mags for less money. Allows common duty optics to be attached directly to the slide instead of to a plate. Staccato, engineered for performance, built for freedom.
So we were really pushing to get this first cohort out the door, and Nezam was in the first cohort. He was an 18 Charlie, engineer sergeant. And I spoke at his graduation. He was super gregarious, came up to me. His call sign was Space Monkey. Everybody, the cadre had named him that because he literally just didn't stop. If he wasn't, doing 18 Charlie stuff, he was building, improving facilities. Like, the guy was just a voracious learner, talked a lot, and he just loved the mission, and he was really excited to be on a team. And I met him at graduation, and then he told me he was going to Kandahar, so I knew I'd see him again, because I was the program manager for VSO, so I was going all over the country, and ended up seeing him again like 3 weeks later, and we became friends.
Oh, wow. And then he gets selected to go to the Q course.
He did. This guy, one of the things, if you talk to veterans of the Afghanistan war who were so upset about the way we left that country, what most of them will tell you are personal stories that they have about the guys they served with. And they were very special guys, and that they either did things to save their lives, or they were just so kind, or, they were our partners. They were our brothers. Nezam was no exception. I've never met anybody that didn't just love that guy and think the world of him. He was shot through the face on one particular mission, walking point. And the last thing he did before he was shot was warn the U.S. guys behind him of the ambush. He told Mullah Mike, the captain, he said, "Look, if you'll just please don't let an Afghan fix my teeth. I want a U.S. dentist to fix my teeth." He was shot through the mouth. And he said, "If you'll get a U.S. dentist for me, I'll come right back out here into the fight." And Mike got him a U.S. dentist, and sure enough, within 5 weeks, he was back in the fight after being shot through the face. And that's the kind of guy he was, Jack. He was just so loyal, such a good friend. And Mike told me at some point, I was out with him. We were on a patrol, and he said, Nezam is really something special. He should go to. I think it's time, because we do this in a lot of countries, and I'm sure you've seen it. We send partners to our courses, right, to even further professionalize what they're doing. And Mike got that, and he said, "I think Nezam should go. He should be an 18 Bravo U.S. Green Beret." And so they put the packet together, and I had already retired at that point. I think it was probably 2014 when he came over to Bragg, but I saw him at Bragg when I was teaching there. And yeah, he went to the Q course, passed everything, flying colors, and is a U.S. certified 18 Bravo Special Forces Sergeant.
Wow. How many guys went through that program from Afghanistan?
Not that many. Not many at all. In fact, when the collapse was happening, we were trying to gather up, certainly guys that were part of the true SF regiment. It was less than 10 that we found. There might have been more than that, but I don't think so. It was probably around 10 would be my guess.
Got it. What, did he speak English already?
Oh, he did, and he just kept working on it. He really self-taught himself, or self-taught to speak English, and just practiced at it a ton. And he just made such good friends with a lot of the characters that are in that book. They just spent all kinds of time together, worked out together, lifted together. They were inseparable, and as such, his English was and is amazing. But here's the other thing too, and I want to really make sure that I point this out. Nezam was an Uzbek, right? So there's this is the other thing that's important to consider about Afghanistan, is that you have several macro level ethnicities that make it very difficult to maintain security in that country. You have Uzbeks, Hazaras, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, and there is a pretty deep seated hatred between those ethnicities. And then you have Pashtun tribes within that. Nezam was an Uzbek. He was from the northern part of the country in Takhar province. He spoke Dari, but he was also a very proficient Pashto speaker. And watching him work in Afghanistan in those rural Pashtun areas, man, he was amazing. He could hold a conversation with anybody. He could sit down with a farmer and have a conversation and endear himself to that farmer the same way he would an 18 Bravo on a team. And so when I say this guy had a command of language, man, he had a command of multiple language, dialects, nuanced, contextual realities of culture, like micro contextual realities that I've never seen. Like, he was the quintessential Green Beret, and really demonstrated for all of us what it means to be, a local operator. And he could do it anywhere.
Yeah, that's amazing. I found myself in Uzbekistan not too long after 9/11, within the year, I think spring 2002, maybe. That time frame it comes to mind because you mentioned it, and then I just found the deck of playing cards that I had from the embassy in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, from back then up there. And I was going through a box looking for something the other day, so it brought back some memories. Now,
I bet.
At this point, you are out, but you're still connected to the community. And what are you doing with guys going through the Q course at this point?
Well, I've been really involved in the architecture and design of village stability operations when I was on active duty. My last several years in, I had the opportunity to help stand this program up, and I had a lot of mentors from the Vietnam era, much like you did. A lot of these guys worked with the Montagnards. They were part of the CIDG program, and they really, really, really felt strong about this approach in Afghanistan. And I was fortunate enough to be connected to a few of them through the agency that were at the agency, and they really helped us in SF put together kind of this methodology that we were looking to do. We didn't come up really with any of it. This was all hard fought lessons from years of advisory work with indigenous tribes around the world. And so VSO was born out of that, I think 6 villages. But I was fortunate at very late in my career to be the program manager of it. So I got to travel around the country as an 05, just helping these guys stand up the programs. And by that, what I mean by that is I would go spend time like with Mullah Mike's team and Cochrez and Nezam and really see, okay, like there's hydrology problems here. There's tribal dynamics issues here. There are grazing issues here. There's land dispute issues here. And as long as those are simmering below the surface, that's what the Taliban's going to pull the thread on, right? And because we had spent the last 10 years driving around throwing soccer balls out the window and kicking doors in, and I know I sound flippant on that, but like it's the only way metaphorically I can get to the point that we didn't understand at a real localized level what were the sources of instability here. And so the teams now are really getting into that. They were living there, they were embedded, they were really starting to get a sense of the low-tech agricultural challenges and how the Taliban were using shadow courts to exploit all these things. And so I found myself at the unique position of being able to run the seams, Jack, and really, if there's a hydrology problem, I'm going to go knock on trailers at Camp Brown until I find a hydrologist that's probably from the University of Montana, sitting in a trailer waiting for somebody to knock on his trailer, and then get his ass on a chopper and fly him out to Cochrane's, and that became my life. And I did that for the rest of the time I was on active duty, was kind of being this steam runner that would help connect bottom to top along security, economic development, governance, tribal dynamics. And I was really empowered to do that. And I loved it. To me, it was exactly what a senior SF officer that was not in command should be doing. And when I got out, General Miller, when I went back to SOCOM, he asked me, would you stay involved with this, with VSO on the state side? And we started running these things called, I don't know if you ever heard of the academic weeks. We would run these academic weeks for the teams that were going over, and they would meet with the hydrologists, the dispute resolution, the tribal dynamics experts. Before they started their pre-mission training, they would spend a week diving into all these civil society issues that would make them more relevant when they got in the villages. And I got to go around and set those things up, man, and set those training sessions up and meet all of these really cool agriculturalists and anthropologists and dispute resolution experts, negotiators. And that continued on after I got out. Like that network that I had built of it, what it really came down to was, how do you go into these places and build trust and rapport when there is none? What innate interpersonal skills do we have at our disposal, and how do we bring not just the art, but which I'd learned in the Q course, but how do you bring the science of reciprocity and influence? And that kind of became something that I really stuck with me. And so I continued to stay involved with this community of practice, and was asked to come back to Bragg and teach that for captains that were going through the course. And it just, eventually, at some point, I looked around and said, all right, well, you know what? Maybe I'll just teach this in corporate America, because it seems pretty short supply there too. So that's what I was doing after I got out, was really teaching the old school interpersonal skills that I'd learned, particularly in the last few years of VSO.
Wow. So in the lead up to 2021, you're keeping your pulse on operations in Afghanistan, specifically on the VSO side of the house, it seems.
Yeah.
So you must have been much more in tune with what was happening there than, let's say, general public. You have actual personal connections to people on the ground there, to Afghans on the ground there. What is that like for you as we get, let's say, from 2020, a year out, and move into 2021, and then to see provinces start falling, which I'm sure you did. And then you move into, let's say, even from, let's say, February, March, April, May, and you see these provinces start falling that from the outside looking in, from the maps that I've seen, they start closing in on Kabul, essentially, provinces. I mean, there's some specs over there that aren't directly connected, but regardless, that's the general scheme of maneuver for these, for what the Taliban is doing. What is that like to watch? One from the outside, but with someone who still has that foot in the community?
That's a great question. I will tell you that I got to see a microcosm of it, almost as a foreshadowing. In 2013, 14, really right before I got out, we pretty much quit on the village stability program, even though we had told locals that we would be with them for, this was going to take decades. And we were saying this like, foreign internal defense in Colombia has been going on for 50 years, and same in the Philippines. And we were very upfront with senior leadership and saying, look, if you start this, you got to stay with it. It's like CPR. You can't just quit. And for a range of reasons, we were pulled out of the villages in 2013, and the program was basically shut down, transformed into Afghan local police. Same thing happened to CIDG, by the way, in Vietnam. They turned it into a conventional program instead of a hamlet defense community-based program, and it fell apart. Well, the same thing happened here, Jack. A lot of the elders, if not almost all of them that I had recruited, were killed in retribution by the Taliban as we pulled out of the villages. And honestly, for me, man, that was it. I couldn't do it anymore. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. I'd been selected for command. I turned it down. I turned down 3 commands, and just said, you know what? I can't do this. It was too, it destroyed me. And at the time, Jim Gant was going through what he was going through. I'd seen that happen. That's actually when I met Stephen Pressfield. I had several talked with him about this, and I just said, I'm out. I can't do this. I'm going to work it on the outside. And so I tell you all that because I saw where this was going in 2013. The way we left VSO, to me, it was like, we're going to do the same thing at scale, and I can't be a part of it. So I kind of put it behind me. Then I had a really crappy transition, and in 2015, almost took my own life. Really went south on just lack of purpose and passion. And it was honestly a couple of mentors that helped me get into storytelling, oral storytelling, as a modality for self-healing, and then ultimately fell in love with the way that allowed me to bridge the civil military gap and kind of bring a lot of these interpersonal skills into the corporate world. So storytelling became my jam in 2017 and 2018. And the reason I'm telling you all that is because Monty, my wife, and I, we had started a nonprofit to help I was convinced that storytelling was a very important modality that was missing from warrior transition. Civil societies all over the world use storytelling as a way to come home, and we just don't. And I felt like if we could teach that and create an environment where that could happen organically, that could be a helpful modality. And to prove that, I wrote a play about the Afghanistan war called Last Out, and was performing that play around the country in 2018, 2019, and even some in 2020. And that's what I was actually doing when the country started to fall apart. I was working really the artistic side of telling the story of VSO, that's in the play, and spending a lot of time with veterans around the country and Gold Star family members at a very grassroots level who were really concerned about how things were going in the country with that war, and more importantly, the number of Americans that just didn't even know we were there. And that was almost the reason I wrote the play, was to inform civilians on the cost of war and what was happening in Afghanistan. And that's what I was doing as all of a sudden Nezam came back on the net with me, and he was basically trying to get his visa approved because he was texting me on Signal, sir, this district just fell, this district just fell. Now this province has fallen. And this is all happening in rapid fire in the spring of 2021. And that's when I really started to pay attention to it. Honestly, I wasn't even paying that much attention to it in 2020. I was too busy doing the play. But by spring of 2021, it had my attention. And I was calling other veterans and asking them, hey, are you seeing this? I was calling friends on active duty, and they all kind of said the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's a house of cards. But no one was talking about it in the media. No one was really talking about it in the political sphere. But on Signal, it was getting loud. Groups were already starting to form around buddies that we had, that we were just scrambling to try to get their SIVs, their special immigration visas, approved. And I think it caught all of us off guard on August 15th when it finally just, the bottom fell out, but the summer of 2021 leading up to that was one event after another that just, you could feel that something was about to happen.
Oh yeah. It's, I was doing research for my novels, and a lot of them do have touch points with Afghanistan, or characters that do have backstories there. So I'm aware of these different provinces falling in that spring, like you mentioned, early 2021, all the way through the spring into that summer. And you're just seeing it. You're just seeing the writing on the wall. And I remember being in the back of a Hilux with an Afghan partner in 2003, I think it was. And I'd always ask if they're a little older. I thought, because sometimes it's hard to tell, the age, with the lot of mileage over there on guys. But I would ask them if they were Mooj. I'd come out right away and ask. I was always very curious what their connection was to 79 to 89, what they were doing during that time frame. So I'd always ask, and got to talk to this guy in the back of this Hilux as we bounced around. And I just remember thinking, with what I know about him, I try to be a student of history and try to take those lessons from the past and apply them to the present however I can. But I remember thinking, man, it's not going to work out well for this guy and for those that are helping us if history is any indication. And I remember thinking that at the time.
That's well said.
Yeah, I just don't know what happened to him long term. That was a long time ago, obviously. And and I don't mean to be too intrusive here, but just in case someone's listening that's dealing with similar things. And in 2015, what saved your life in 2015?
My middle son Cooper came home from school sooner than he was supposed to. I was in the closet with the pistol under my chin, and I heard the door slam. I heard his voice, and I can remember thinking, "What kind of asshole kills himself and lets his kid find it?" And that's, it was humiliating, and I just remember just staying in the dark in that closet, just crying, just like I didn't know what to do. Do I let him know I'm here? And he didn't hear me. And I came out a little bit later after I got myself together, but I cleared the weapon, put it up, and never talked about it, Jack, until 2019. I never talked to my wife about it. I never told my boys, and I'd had several close calls. That was the closest it ever got to me. But that as I came out of that place, though, I knew at that point, I was like, okay, I got to do something, man. Like this can't continue, and my big thing was I was convinced that I was still relevant, and I knew that I could. I mean, I was 41, for God's sake. I was like, I could still. I've got things to say. I've learned a lot in my time in SF, but the problem was for me was just I every time I got in front of people, I would lock up. I would just go inside myself. I would severe anxiety. I'd kind of lost my purpose and my passion, and I just couldn't. I was just isolated. And so my wife, man, she's the other thing that saved my butt, was that she really even though she didn't know about that day, she knew that I was desperate, and she really pushed me to try to find what it was that I needed to find. And I didn't know. I tried the corporate thing. I tried contracting, and it didn't. And then I was like, babe, I feel like I feel like I could be a speaker. I know that sounds crazy, but like being on the stage and speaking, I feel like I have something to say. And she's like, well, go. So I would go to these workshops and things around the country, and like listen to how to be a better speaker. And I hated it, but there was this one that I went to in LA where this guy named Bo Eason was speaking, and he was a former NFL football player that was a free safety for the Houston Oilers in the 80s, and was voted like the dirtiest free safety in the NFL. But he'd blown his knee out for the 7th time, and he became an actor and then a playwright, wrote his own play about going into the NFL as a runt, and then a speaking coach. And so this guy's about to come out, and I thought, okay, so I watched this guy, and he walked out on the stage, man, and he was unreal. It was like seeing Mark in the soda shop again. In the way he moved like an operator, and I had not felt like in the presence of that kind of professionalism. And I knew immediately that that's what I'm going to do. He was telling a story about becoming an NFL player and playing with Jerry Rice. It had nothing to do with me, but it had everything to do with me. It was like that. It was the first time that I really experienced kind of that universal singular of storytelling. And it was so much the physicality of it and the way he moved and the way the audience was just so connected to him. And so I went up to him after he spoke and told him who I was. And I think I just broke down, honestly. And he's like, hey man, I'm going to help you, and he, God bless that guy. He worked with me for 2 years. 2 years. He worked with me, trained me, poured himself into me, and helped me get myself together and reconnect with my own narrative and my story. And eventually even mentored me into writing my own play. That is how Gary, you and I met through Gary. I mean, Gary Sinise ultimately saw the play and had done a play like that called Tracers in the 80s. And he felt like after the Afghanistan collapse, it needed to be out in the world again. So he produced it. And, but all of that happened, Jack. It all originated in a closet, man, with a pistol.
Wow. because I knew about you're a playwright, but I didn't realize that it happened, that you've been doing it for a while. For some reason, I thought it all surrounded this situation here. I didn't realize that it was something you'd been doing already years in the lead up before August of 2021.
We had,
wow.
Yeah, we had already put 16 cities and 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van. And that was the other thing about it, was like, I've never written a play, and I acted in the play as well. I learned how to act at age 50. I would sneak up to New York and I would study under Larry Moss and some of these people that Bo introduced me to that otherwise would not have given me the time of day. And they worked with me on how to tell this story from the stage. And I'd never acted, and it was really difficult. It was hard, man. I had to really work through a lot of trauma. And but I knew that if I could, that this play could really serve a lot of people. It could reach a lot of people. And so we put an all veteran cast together, some of them like me, non-actors. And then we toured the country on our own, a nonprofit. We had no money. We put 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van. We traveled with our own counselors, and we did, I think, like 250 PTS interventions in the lobbies of high school auditoriums and cafeterias. And I mean, we went all the way to Santa Barbara. Steve came to the play in Santa Barbara and saw the play. And, but it was, it was almost essential to what happened with Pineapple and everything that I'm doing now, was the fact that we did this play for a year and on our own. And we felt like the story needed to be told. And along the way, the people that we met in those rooms and that talked to us, and that the Gold Star families that we connected to, I think that's why I felt so compelled to do something with Pineapple, because it was so fresh in my mind how much it mattered to these people whose voices had been forgotten, who just didn't feel seen or heard. That year of traveling with the play and telling the story, man. And I had not even met Gary yet. That didn't happen until after Pineapple manifested, and we put the play on the road again. That's when Gary and I became friends in 21, 22, 23. Man, that play was at the center of my life when Afghanistan collapsed.
Wow. Well, give me a rundown of what the play's about.
So I told Mike Rowe, it's a Wonderful Life with Body Armor. It's about, I just got, as I thought about this, I wanted to tell the story of you always see the first in kind of stories, and I love those stories, but there wasn't really a theatrical story from stage about the last out, the guys and girls who go back and forth time after time, day after day, year after year. And I wanted to tell that story. I wanted Americans to understand, like, these amazing humans that just deployed for years in this war and didn't ask for anything, and what their families went through. So the basic storyline, Jack, is it's based on 3 team sergeants that I had that I lost in combat, and they're a composite character named Danny Patton, Master Sergeant Danny Patton. I also wanted it to be about an NCO, and Danny is mortally wounded in the first scene, and he's trying to ascend to Valhalla, but he's stuck. Something's holding him back. He can't ascend, and so his best buddy Kenny, who's based on my best friend Cliff, who was killed in the Pentagon. He comes down from Valhalla. He's an operator, and he brings other operators who were killed in other wars with him, and they're shapeshifters. They become all the people in Danny's life that made his heart pump the most blood. And they have to become all of these different characters and get Danny to let go before his heart stops beating. Or if he doesn't let go before his heart stops beating, he's doomed to endless damnation. And so they become, his wife, Lynn, his son, Caden, his arch nemesis, Saeed Wali, and Colonel Smith. They become his elder friend, Malik John. It's like 16 characters. And it's, they play all these different characters, and I play Danny. And so basically he's just pummeled and assaulted with these memories, and he's between his fire base and his living room. And so the audience goes for the full ride from the time he goes to selection, the Q course, gets married, has his kid, 9/11, and then just deployment after deployment as the wheels start to come off. And then he figures out what he's holding on to, and he lets go, and he ascends. And then we do a talk back at the end of the play. The actors come out, they sit with the audience, and we do a talk back, and it's pretty powerful.
Wow. That's what I've heard from people who have seen it. I know I'd love to see it at some point. Have you written other plays? What's the status of playwriting right now?
Yeah, so we'll get you to one. We're putting the 25 season together now. I'll let you know where all we're going to be. I'm not in it this year. It's weird. I'm not in it for the first time. I'm the executive producer, but I'm not in the play, and the reason is because I am working on a one person show around Pineapple Express. I've always wanted to do a one person show. I love them. I think they are so cool. Very difficult, but I think Pineapple should be a one person show. So I've completed the first draft. I'm working with a dramatist right now. So I hope to start workshopping Pineapple Express as a one person show by the spring of 25. And we'll have Last Out touring simultaneously, starting in January.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to see both. Speaking of one person plays, I got to see Hal Holbrook become Mark Twain back when I was a kid in the mid '80s. My mom took me, and I still remembered. It stays, it stays with you. It was incredible to see in person. He was a young kid. I was enthralled, of course, with Mark Twain and Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn and all that stuff back in the day. So it was really cool to be able to see.
Oh, must have been awesome. Yeah, been awesome. Wow.
Now, lead up to Withdrawal, we have something that happens in July of 2021 where Afghan Special Operations Force, I think it was commandos, I'm not positive, but essentially get executed by the Taliban in July, which was a big deal. But that writing was on the wall. That happens in July, that atrocity, as they're surrendering is what I think happened. And then we move through July into August. So we get to August. What are you doing in August of 2021?
Okay, so when that, for context, when that execution happened, it was a major from the Special Operations Command of the Afghans. And Nezam at the time was stuck as a contractor in a power plant. And so we're trying to get him out up in the north. We're trying to get him out of this power plant. And he had actually texted a handful of us because he was excited that this task force was making its way in his general direction. And it was led by this young major. And they ran into a buzzsaw. And when they surrendered, they were executed on film. And it was a real blow. It was a blow to the Afghan forces for sure, because these guys were, some of the best of the best. They were Koskete and commandos. And this young major was really the kind of the rising star in the command. But it was also a blow individually to guys like Nezam, who were holding out hope that that some kind of unilateral strike or task force could do something to turn the tide. And so in that time period and leading up to August, I was becoming more and more consumed with trying to get Nezam's special immigration visa approved, because he was out of the Army at this point. He was eligible for an SIV. And as a result of that, I started talking again, Jack, to guys on active duty that I hadn't talked to in years. I mean, I'd completely shifted focus to this restoration kind of approach to my life, and healing through storytelling and that kind of thing. Like I was not your draft pick for personnel recovery, but out of necessity, started talking to guys in SWCC, started talking to guys in USASOC, the Army Special Ops Command, SOCOM. I'm here in Tampa; they're just down the road. Like, hey, what's going on, and what's the plan to get guys like Nezam, who were part of our regiment? Like, what are we doing with them? How can I hand him off to you responsibly and get him out of there? And what kept coming back was, I don't know. Like, we're not sure. Like, we're working. We've got a list. I'll go talk to the boss. Like, those were the kind of things. And I get it. I mean, they really didn't know. But by August, it became very clear to me. And I had told my wife and a couple of other buddies, hey, I don't think anybody's coming, man. Like, I don't think anybody's coming. I think these guys are going to be on their own, and so that nightmare scenario of, oh my God, if they're on their own, I mean, what are they going to do? Like, how are they going to, and then I started kind of poking around and I confirmed this after I wrote Pineapple. I've even spoken to some of the last teams on the ground. I don't know if you know this, Jack. There were no special forces teams, like coherent ODAs, on the ground in the final days of the withdrawal. And you think, okay, well, like, I mean, every SOF unit has its charter. Certainly, Special Forces has a charter of unconventional warfare. And if we're going to leave the country, you would think a resistance and the architecture for a resistance would be really important based on what we had to do the first time we went in, with no pre-existing relationships between Fifth Group and the Northern Alliance. We had to bring CIA guys out of retirement. Not a single SFODA on the ground in the final days leading up to the collapse. There were operators and door kickers and things like that, but there were no coherent SFODAs doing what SFODAs would do in those moments. And I don't understand it. I think there needs to be a lot of questions answered on that, but that's one of the things that became apparent was like, oh man, like there's no real partner activity going on here for these guys. They're on their own. And that's when, for me, it got to be really daunting and overwhelming. It was like, oh my God, like these guys are literally going to get left on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that after 20 years, that's the best we could do. 20 years to plan for that contingency. Right. And that's the best that the United States could do.
Yep, exactly. And that's where, and honestly, to this day, and maybe if there's someone watching this sees it and can let me know, I have yet to see a senior level special operations after action review that is worthy of that 20-year partnership. I don't think one's been done. I don't think there's been, and by that, I mean, like, because the reason, you do after action reviews, sure, you want to learn lessons, but also what does it mean for the future? How has this impacted partnership for young SEALs and young Green Berets operating, say, in Ukraine? I've had more than one anecdotal vignette given to me, Jack, of a young Green Beret officer leaning over in a sense of urgency to a Ukrainian partner saying, sir, you just need to trust me. And that Ukrainian comes back with, oh, you mean like the Afghans trusted you? Sure. And I don't know, man. I mean, like, you're right. If that's the best we can do with a 20-year partnership, and then the fact that we have not even done a hot wash or a lessons learned on this, to me, it's just egregious. And what it tells me is that we're going to do it again if we're not careful.
Yeah, no senior level accountability as well. I mean, that thing that Lieutenant Colonel Paul Yingling wrote back in, 2006, what, a crisis in generalship or something along those lines. That's the general gist of the title anyway. The private who loses a rifle gets in more trouble than a general who loses a war. That holds true. It's tough.
Yeah.
And so where did Pineapple come from? Where did Task Force Pineapple come from? When do things really start to ramp up, and when do you get involved and realize, hey, this isn't just going to be something that I'm getting some reports on, some text messages that I'm passing through. I'm going to be intimately involved with rescuing not just Nezam, but others as well.
Well, this kind of speaks to the fact that this is one of the reasons that I wanted to really tell the story in the third person as a storyteller and not, this.
I noticed that surprised me when I started reading. I'm like, wait a sec. I went back to the front. And I'm like, wait a sec. Okay. Yeah. Scott Mann. Yep. So yeah, I was surprised that it was third person, but I liked it. I liked that you did it that way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was, for me, it's kind of a no brainer and in fact, when I didn't want to write the book because the whole thing was so painful. But my dad really was the one who said, hey, Scott, you need to tell the story, but tell it through the eyes of the partnership, tell it through the eyes of the friendship, tell it through the eyes of the Afghans who were in that, that crap canal that they were in. And I knew to do that, I needed to be in the third person. So I convinced Simon & Schuster to let me do that. And to their credit, they trusted me with that. And honestly, Jack, the reason too, it speaks to your question, was that I just felt like the whole time I was out over my skis the entire time. I never felt one time like I was the right guy to be doing this, or that this was something that I, was destined to do. Because in SF, I always felt like we were doing VSO, like, okay, I'm equipped for this. I was trained for this. I may not know the answer, but these NCOs do. But in Pineapple, I always felt like I was way out over my skis. We should not be doing this. This is not what civilians and veterans should be doing right now. We're trying to solve an Uncle Sam's problem with our pension funds and our cell phones. It just didn't feel right. And then when it came to working like Nezam's navigation home or to the airfield, we weren't on the ground. We didn't have access and placement. We didn't have a 501c3. We didn't have resources. So nothing about it just felt right. And it was discovery learning. It was kicking at things in the dark, desperate, all the time. And that's kind of what was going on. I mean, Nezam at this point had made it back to Kabul. And honestly, when Kabul fell, he was so disillusioned. I could tell we were about to lose him. He was hiding in his uncle's house like Anne Frank. And his uncle was about to kick him out. And I had nothing. Like, I had no idea. I told Monty, my wife, I said, he's a dead man walking. I have no idea how we're going to move him to Kabul airport. I mean, he's a commando, he's special forces, he's U.S. special forces. They're going to check his biometrics and he's done. And so what I did was I just called a few buddies who had worked with him that I felt like would be the right guys. Like, for example, I called Mike Waltz, who's a congressman. We had served together in Afghanistan, but I knew we were going to need somebody that could kick some political doors open. And so he connected me with his staffer, Liv. I called Mullah Mike, who was now a active duty commander of a battalion in Europe of a special forces battalion. And I got a few other guys. And so I had a pretty good little cell of folks that were good thinkers and they knew Nezam and they knew the city. And so we just basically started putting a plan together that we could be his lifeline and his ears and eyes as he moved. We could drop pins on where the Taliban were and maybe just maybe get some doors open for him if we could get him to the airport. That was the plan. And so we got him within like 4 feet of the Marines. It took 96 hours, I think. We'd stayed up on our phones on signal, taking turns on watch. And Nezam had to do the bulk of it himself, getting through that crowd, no water, no food. And he finally got within like 4 feet. And then they found out the Marines were going to kick him out. So we did a desperation call to a guy named JP, who was a diplomat inside the wire. I don't even know where we got the phone number. And we're like, JP, we told him all about Nezam. He's like, you have 1 minute. What is it? And we told him about Nezam. We told him about the Q course, getting shot through the face. And he goes like, did you guys know I was SF before I was in State Department? Really? And he said, okay, they're going to toss him. He's got to say a password. I thought, what's the password? And he said, pineapple. Tell him to say pineapple as loud as he can. And so we're screaming at Nezam, dude, say pineapple. And so he's really laid back and he walks over to this guy at the gate and he says, excuse me, sir, I'm the pineapple. And the guy's like, you're the pineapple? Yep. And he lets him through. And that's how he got through. And we get a selfie on the other side of the gate that he's through. And so we started calling ourselves Task Force Pineapple at that point. And then it just became, when word got out that Nezam had escaped, Signal is a really organic environment, and so all these other folks were like, hey, I heard Nez got out. I've got 15 Casca Tejas. Hey, I heard Nez got out. I've got 30 commandos plus families. They're heading to the airfield. And all of a sudden we went from this little room of 6 veterans and 1 dude to 120 veterans and 6,000 Afghan special operators, interpreters, the Minister of Women's Affairs. I mean, it just ballooned. And we weren't alone, man. I mean, there were so many volunteer groups. Jack, I'm sure you've been around them, worked around them. They were amazing. Digital Dunkirk, Sacred Promise, Moral Compass. We were just one of a bunch doing pretty much the same thing. I think the only difference was that probably we told the story, in a pretty compelling way. And honestly, after Nezam got out, it was the guys and girls that came into the group that really did the heavy lifting, and I just took good notes.
Did you eventually have guys on the ground, other than JP, that could help get some of these people through the Marine, through the guards?
Yeah. So the book's almost split in half, and the second part of it is really where we went to scale. We went to scale on, and how do we get more Afghans out? And we had a former Green Beret turned Syracuse middle school teacher named Zach Loyce, and Zach got on the phone with us pretty quick, and he said, "Hey guys, I've got an idea for an underground railroad. We're studying Harriet Tubman right now in civics, and I think that could work, but we need somebody on the inside." Well, Congressman Walz's staffer, Liv, had just had an interaction with a company commander and first sergeant, John and Jesse, respectively, from the White Devils of the 82nd Airborne, Charlie Company, I think 1st Battalion. They'll kill me if I got that wrong. But Jesse and John were in a unique position on the airfield, Jack, where they were not necessarily committed to the perimeter. They were near Abbey Gate, but they were pulling like secondary security. So they were like one echelon back. And so like in depth. So they had flexibility to help out. And they had been walking down to check on one of their guys, an interpreter. And they came across this dude with his wife who was pregnant, sitting in the dirt inside the airfield. And he's like, "You're from the 82nd. You're here to help me." And they said, "No." And so they found the guy was polite, and they went off. And Jesse, the first sergeant, couldn't get that guy off his mind and how pregnant that woman was. And he said to his company commander, "Hey, sir, if we can't find this interpreter, can we go back and check on that?" He said, "Sure." Turns out they were very connected to Congressman Waltz, and she was 9 months pregnant, about to pop. And so Jesse, John, and their medic picked her up, drove them across the airfield, took them to the roll-through clinic, the Norwegian clinic, got her seen, got her, stabilized. And then they took her on over to Apron 8, and they got her evac through the State Department. So in doing that, they pretty much operationalized the full internal apparatus that it would take to move somebody from the wire all the way out. And so they got on the phone with Liv, who wanted to thank them, from Congressman Waltz's office. And she said, "Hey, not saying it could happen, but we work with some pretty highly vetted operators in Pineapple. We can get them to the gate at Abbey Gate, but we don't know what to do next." And they said, "We might be able to help." And so when Zach said in that moment, "Hey, does anybody have anybody on the inside for this underground railroad?" Liv said, "I think I might." And they brought them together. They got on a phone call. We all got on a phone call. Zach laid out his underground railroad. John laid out the internal apparatus. And it turned out there was a 4-foot hole in the gate at Abbey Gate that they could basically go through at a certain time at night. And then we would send baseball cards, pictures of the commando and his family, full names, like target data, right? But except it was, personnel moving. And then because these guys were pretty tactically trained in link ups and that kind of thing, they could move tactically with their families through that crowd. And there was basically a trench of feces that paralleled the fence. And the way it would work is when the conductors of the express, John and Jesse, deemed it was safe at night, they would say the express is open on signal. Zach had already sent baseball cards to them, submitted by the individual shepherds who were moving their partners, right? Those baseball cards would go to Jack or to John and Jesse. Then they would get behind a HESCO barrier at Abbey Gate near the 4-foot hole in the fence with a green chem light. And then Zach would move these guys' families like planes lining up at LaGuardia. He would stack them. And then at right time, right place, they would drop into the canal, and they would look for the green chem light. The Taliban would not go into the feces canal. So they would look for the green chem light, and when they saw it, they would hold a pineapple up on their phone. At which point, Jesse or John would challenge the commando, "Hey, name and number of party." They would respond. If it was accurate, they would pull them up out of the trench, count them through, search them, put them in Hilux trucks, and take them over to Apron 8. And that was the Pineapple Express.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, how many people it took. If one of those people is missing from this chain, it doesn't happen. it seems. And if Liv Gardner, I think is her name, she's like a linchpin, it seems, between Congressman Waltz's office and guys on the ground. I mean, one of these people isn't in that chain, this doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. And what was crazy about it was that this on the veteran side, this is all happening on Signal. So it's like looking at the world through a soda straw, right? So you had one big Signal room where we were all operating and typing in thousands of entries. And then you had like, for example, Will Lyles, an SF captain who lost both legs in Afghanistan. His interpreter, Kazim, is now on the run, right? And he saved Will's life. He helped put the tourniquet on his legs. And now Will is his shepherd. So Will's down in Houston as a COO of a lumber company, walking around on prosthetics on his phone during the duty day, texting with Kazim, who is moving, trying to get through that crowd. And so you have this massive room where all the deconfliction is happening, and people are dropping pins for Taliban checkpoints, and we've got active duty people in there that are giving us insights. And then you have the private rooms where Will is physically moving Kazim, to the Pineapple Express and giving him explicit instructions on when to enter the canal. So the intricacies of this, and there was no training other than what we got in the 20-year war and just the trust of each other. But the levels of collaboration and ingenuity, and frankly, just kind of can-do spirit, man, I can't. That's why I wrote it in third person, because I can't claim a damn bit of it. Yeah. It was these amazing humans who just found a way to do it because it was the right thing to do. And it, you just tried to keep up with it. I tried to run top cover for them where I could, talk about it on media, whatever I could do, but it wasn't much, man. These individuals were and I think the characters speak for themselves in the book. Like you said, if one person hadn't shown up, but there's one other thing I'll say to this, Jack, that I think is really important is it wasn't just commandos. It wasn't just Afghan special forces. Liv and a whole team of female shepherds, including a female ambassador for women's affairs, moved Hasina Safi, the minister of women's affairs, the most wanted woman in Afghanistan. They moved her through the same apparatus. And she was the matriarch of her family. She was terrified of soldiers all the way back from when her father was beaten by the Russians. She was more scared of them, of the 82nd, than she was the Taliban, who had just beaten her family. And so Liv and these other women are moving Hasina and her family. They dropped out of the ditch. Hasina's the first one in. And she's literally about to crap her pants. She's so scared of these soldiers that are going to pull her across in the middle of the night. And she sees this hand reach down after she's challenged. She shows the pineapple. And she grabs the hand, and it's Jesse, the first sergeant from South Georgia. And he smiles at her, and he says, "I'm Jesse. You're safe now." And she says that when she went into that trench, she had 5 brothers, and when she came out, she had 6. And to this day, man, they still stay in touch. She's over in the UK. I think he's gone over to see her. But the level of humanity that happened those couple of nights, and what those people did to get hundreds of Afghans out through that apparatus, I'm still in awe of it. And you're right, man. Had one person not stepped up, it could have been a complete disaster. But I mean, more so than it was. But it wasn't. And one other thing, Jack, I went back when I was writing the book, and I like you, I did a lot of research, and I looked for the words Biden and Trump in tens of thousands of entries in the Signal chat room that had since been shut down. Biden was mentioned one time and Trump was mentioned never, by over 100 operators working the worst abandonment in our national history, because there was no time for it. There was just no time for that. There was no need for that. It was all just myopically focused on doing the right thing. And I just thought that was striking, that in the midst of all of that and all the reasons to be angry and bitter and everything else, there was zero political discord. It was all about just getting the mission done, and mostly veterans doing it, not even on active duty.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I'm going to go back and refresh my memory on Signal if it's not erased yet during that time frame. A buddy on the ground over there that was sending me some things, asking if I could pass them on to people that I knew, which I did, both in the DC bureaucracy and then on in the media as well. But man, you guys did something, and it's just incredible. How many people did you end up moving through your network, and then do you know how many roughly were moved through these different veteran networks that were doing similar things during that time frame?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, just to be clear, when I was talking about the Biden Trump thing, that was in the Signal chat room for Pineapple. Mm. There was like there was no. I guess my point was there wasn't any political BS. It was just get it done. No distractions. As far as the number that we moved, I think the total number was somewhere between 750 and 1,000. It was really hard to count, but that's conservative. I think what was moved from like 19 August to 30 August. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but I'm pretty confident in those numbers. As far as, there were 100,000 plus in the airlift. The other groups, I don't know. I would venture to say, and I don't think this is probably too far off, that the preponderance of special operators that came out probably were facilitated in some way by these veterans groups, because that was where, like the really highly vetted individuals that made it out were probably had a guide from these volunteer groups, not necessarily Pineapple. It was very difficult to just self-select and get yourself out. Some of that happened, but I would say the really highly vetted individuals were guided by one of these groups. And, I'll tell you this, there are probably 30,000 special operators left behind that are still there.
Yeah. And take me through the day of August 26th.
Yeah. So this is there's kind of two ticking clocks at this point. That the non-combatant evacuation is coming to an end, right? That's clear. It's in the chat room. There's talk about it. There's also increasing chat about an ISIS suicide bomber in the chat rooms. I mean, it's Bolo reports, be on the lookout reports are all over the place. And remember too, at this point, this really unprecedented kind of private-public partnership has evolved in the Signal room between, like, you've got active duty guys and girls in there, you've got State Department in there. I mean, people are really operating on Signal, and it's very much this conglomerate of the private-public sector that's getting this done. And a lot of chatter is starting to pick up about a suicide bomber. And in fact, the last period of darkness, the Pineapple Express almost didn't run at all because there was such a concern for a suicide bomber. And that's when John put on the red sunglasses during the day, because he knew that was the last chance to do a pull, and he couldn't use the green chem light. So he became Captain Red Sunglasses. That became the far recognition signal for the Pineapple Express. And so we were telling our people, look for an officer in red sunglasses. And that was how they converged on him. But you could start to feel a certain level of desperation in the crowd, in the chat room, certainly in private conversations. I mean, you had individuals, Jack, who had been in this mass of human flesh for 5-6 days. Their children had been trampled, no food, no water, 100-degree temperatures. The Taliban are forming the outer perimeter. They're beating the crap out of folks. You've got the paramilitaries on the inner perimeter that are shooting Hazaras at will. I mean, it's a mess, and it's just this guy, UC Tanner, who was a Finnish diplomat in Pineapple, compared it to the raft of the Medusa, the raft that hangs in the Louvre. It's a painting that was towed behind a lifeboat off the coast of Africa, where the less desirable members of a ship were towed because they hit a sandbar, and they cut the raft away, and it just became this raft of murder and cannibalism and just human suffering. And it's just really tough painting to even look at. And UC said that's what the crowd reminded him of, was the raft of the Medusa in living form. And so, you really had, by the 26th, man, the suffering was terrible, and you could feel it. Also in the veterans that had stayed on the phone, they were, for example, my buddy Steve, who was guiding an individual named Rozik, on the phone. Steve is like got his face buried in the pillow of his bedroom because Rozik is saying, Steve, they're beating my wife right now. Like, please tell me I can fight back. And Steve's like, no, man, you got to go 5 feet around the Connex and you're done. Just hang in there. While they're beating the crap out of this guy's wife, you can hear her screaming on the phone, and so by the time we get to the 26th and nothing ran that night, so these folks are out in this just horrific crowd. I had made the call, hey, call it. I think we got to get them home. Don't keep them out in this. And so a lot of them had gone home when all of a sudden we got the word that the conductors were back on the bridge and they were in red sunglasses. And so it was a mad scramble at this point, Jack, in the last few hours in broad daylight to get people out. And all I know is that towards the end of it, I was sitting in this office right now. There was a group of, so we were getting people out. They were pulling them out even at the last minute. And Jesse and John had gone back to their CP, their command post, to just rest and refit before one more pull. And Jesse asked John if he could smoke a cigarette before they went back to do one more pull. So he's like, sure, First Sergeant. So he's burning a cigarette. I mean, they're exhausted. The guys from Charlie Company are waiting on him. And then Jesse finishes his cigarette. They load it up in the Hilux trucks. They drive past the Turkish Tower across the airfield, and they're approaching Abbey Gate from the internal part of the airfield. And they're walking towards the HESCO barriers. They can hear the roar of the crowd really louder than ever because everybody senses this is it. And then a thud, and Jesse described a thud in his chest. And everybody hit the ground. And he looked up and he saw, almost in slow motion, objects in the sky that were landing near him, a foot, an arm. And he realized in that moment that it was an ID. And so he told his guys to move forward, and they pushed through the HESCO, pushed past where, like up against the barriers on the other side of the HESCO, and started pulling security while their medics fell back and triaged and helped the Marines. And, that was how, at least from Jesse and John's perspective, within the signal rooms, I mean, obviously these were veterans that were not enduring anything, no sense of physical harm like these guys, Marines and 82nd were, but there's been an explosion. That's what came across the signal room. There's been an explosion. And I know for me at the time, we were trying to get a group of orphan girls out, and they were very near the link-up point. And I can just remember texting, what about Jesse and John? What about the girls? And it was just radio silence at that point. You heard nothing. There was and then just different inputs from people in the signal chat room, but you weren't getting anything from the active duty anymore. And you just knew it was bad. And that's when it all really ended. That's when the NEO ended. That's when they welded gates shut. That's when they shut down, pulling anybody else in. And Jesse and John and the Marines all started the retrograde activities inside the perimeter. They're not only are they triaging their wounded, but they're trying to, double down on security and get out of there. Meanwhile, the Shepherds and the Pineapple Group and Dunkirk and all these others, we're sitting here trying to sort out, like, what do we do with all these people remaining on this manifest? A lot of them had gotten out of there, but like, what now? What? You hang up the phone. Sorry, wish it could have worked out. Like, with the most part, we didn't. Now you started looking for safe houses. Now you started looking for food drops. Now you started trying to raise money. Now you started thinking about becoming a 501c3. Now you start looking at your kids' college fund. And all those things happened, and over the last 3 years, that's what a lot of these groups have continued to do, is they've sustained, the most vulnerable of our partner force who can't show their face. Some of them went to the resistance and are fighting, but, some can't, and for a range of reasons. And so you've still got groups, Jack, that are that are working those problems at 3 years after the fact, you know. But that's what happened on the 26th. And you know, it kind of was the beginning of the end for the NEO for us. And we did try to form a task force pineapple 501c3. It was a mitigated disaster. The guys were so exhausted and spent, and, you know, no one was interested in Afghanistan anymore. It shifted to Ukraine almost overnight. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to tell this story. And then I'm going to try to find a way to keep Afghanistan and what happened there top of mind somehow. And that's kind of been my life since then.
Wow. And this book right here, what lessons do you hope people draw from this?
You know, I started the whole story with two questions. I always try to do that when I write is what does a promise mean to you, and how far would you go to honor it? Two very, very simple questions. And I really tried hard in that book, as I wrote it from the third person, to ask that question to everybody I talked to. And I interviewed, you know, Joint Staff. I interviewed a lot of politicians, NATO diplomats. I interviewed people that were on the ground in Abbey Gate. I interviewed a ton of Afghans that didn't make it out, ones that did. You know, and obviously members of the Express like Zach and Liv. But I would always ask that question, and I would always try to, you know, really bring those answers to light and highlight it, not necessarily in what they said, but what they did, you know, and try to let that be my filter to really illuminate what these amazing people did and what some of these less than amazing people did. And let that question just those two questions speak for themselves. Like you can tell what a promise means to this person and what they would do to honor it, and what it means to this person and what they would do to honor it. And I think what I hope people would come away with in reading this book, it's what was not told in the mainstream media or on the political stage, was just how much a promise means to our veterans and to our military community, like, and just how far they'll go to honor it. But also to the Afghan partners and what they were willing to do, and the levels and depths of friendship and loyalty that predated pineapple by, in some cases, years. That's why, you know, just maybe come away with why it matters so much, why Afghanistan and those 20 years matter so much, and that we can't just turn the page on it like it's a ServPro commercial, like it never even happened. Like, it really mattered, and it still matters. And there's a lot that's happening in the world right now that we damn sure better pay attention to, because we abandoned a promise, we abandoned a friend, and, you know, karma's a bitch, man. And I hope that people will read that book and just understand the depth of the relationships and friendships and just straight up honor that our GWAT generation served with. And the partners that they fought alongside. They're just amazing humans.
Yeah. And did you and Nezam become neighbors? Is this what happened?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I was trying to keep him from freaking out when he was in the safe house. And I just told him, I said, look, you're going to be my neighbor, man. You're going to live next to me. We're going to hang out. And sure enough, when he got to the States, we applied to be his sponsor, and he came to Riverview, and the community, including Gary Sinise was very, very helpful. We were able to get Nezam in a house rent-free for a couple of years so that he could get his feet on the ground. He got his GED, he got his driver's license. We got his kids enrolled in school. We helped, someone donated a car, for God's sake, a used car. Furniture. It was amazing, like the way the community really stepped up for him. And he lived beside me just down the road for a couple of years. And, you know, I don't think we saw each other as much as I would have liked, but we did. You know, he came over a lot, and I got to go over and see him a lot. And he has since moved to Texas. He lives on a farm in Texas. He's very much a recluse. He doesn't want to be around anybody. He just wants to spend time on his own. We talk all the time. He owns his own truck and trailer. He's an over the horizon trucker, over the road trucker. And you know what? When recently we've stood Task Force Pineapple back up to be an advocate for our GWAT generation and to pay attention to things like Afghanistan and tell the story. But we also, whenever the government struggles with stuff, the Pineapple Network jumps in, and we responded to 2 hurricanes just recently, including the one in Florida, where I live in Tampa. And so we basically try to just fill the gaps and use signal and share information and push supplies and basically be a supplement to state and local and federal as needed, because our veterans are amazing and they can move fast, as you saw in Western North Carolina. It was right on the eve of the hurricane coming into Tampa, and I get a call on signal, and it's, "Hey, sir, this is Nezam. I've got my truck. It's empty. Where do you need me?" And he drove from Houston in an empty tractor trailer to haul supplies for people struck by the hurricane. And I think that pretty much says it all right there.
Wow, sure does. And you have a new book out here, Nobody is Coming to Save You. Mike Rowe writes the foreword. And what's going on with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've been working on it for 6 years. I always wanted to write a leadership book, and I just would get close to it and then throw it in the trash. I didn't like it. And a lot of people were asking me after Pineapple and after Last Out, like, how did you write a play when you're not a playwright? How did you perform a play in Steppenwolf when you're not an actor? How did you get guys out of Afghanistan when you didn't really have any authority? And I guess I mean, I never thought about that, but I do like to think that I learned from some very amazing special ops NCOs how to connect with other humans and how to get big things done when nobody's coming. I mean, the whole idea of that title was something SF NCOs said to me all the time as a junior officer. Like, "Sir, nobody's coming. It's just us," And I love that line over time because it just settles into this mindset of, good, okay, like, let's get to work then. And that's when you really see, I think, small teams do amazing things and get big stuff done. And so that's what I wanted the book to be about, because I think that these times that we live in, how Steve talks about resistance as the internal enemy. Well, in this book, I talk about the churn as the external enemy. And it's all of these social conditions that have evolved and conspire to keep us from getting big stuff done. And it's the division, the distrust, the disconnection of a modern civil society. And how do we just use old school interpersonal skills and deep purpose to navigate through that churn? And so the book is just, it's a lot of stories, some military, some not, some about the play, of just using and other. I tried again. I mean, I tried to write it from the third person. I mean, I'm in it, but I talk about a lot of folks who demonstrate these old school interpersonal skills and human connection as a way to get big stuff done, and that it's very possible for us in the world that we live in today. And I guess that's my hope, is that book can kind of be a field guide for travel ball coaches, parents, business owners who are just so caught up in this caustic division that's all around us, and that can employ, the stuff that our grandparents taught us, and show both the art and the science of influence at an authentic level. And then it works, and it works really well. And you can really and you don't have to have a title, but if you just put into practice how we're wired to interact with one another, you can get some big stuff done. And hopefully that book helps people do it. At the core of it is storytelling, which has my heart forever, is the ability to be a storyteller, what I call narrative competence. And hopefully the book helps folks do that.
Amazing. Well, I encourage everybody to read Operation Pineapple Express. Check out the new one right here. And thank you for everything that you did in uniform, that you've done since your retirement, the example you set for veterans and non-veterans alike. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the road and checking out both of the plays in the years ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. And I got to say the same to you, man. And I know I speak for a lot in our community, is like you've really modeled for a lot of us what's possible, man. Like, I mean, at the highest level, but dude, you've done it with such integrity and humility. And you've never, ever forgotten where you've come from. I love your posts about where you go old school back to vintage influencers and things like that. And I just think, it's just, I appreciate it. And I know a lot of us do. I tell Steve this all the time, same thing, like to have somebody that you look up to who models what it looks like, is so needed today. And no matter how impactful you get, you don't stop doing it, man. And I'm humbled to spend time with you. I'm grateful. But I know I speak for a lot from our community that just thanks for doing it right, man. And thanks for showing us what right looks like.
Oh man, I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. So thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see you in person soon.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right. Take care.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.